Good evening and welcome to the Armenian Studies Program inaugural lecture. We are thrilled to have Eric Bogosian actually back with us, and I'm sure you're all anticipating his lecture. This year marks, this academic year, marks the centennial of both World War I, 1914, and the Armenian Genocide, 1915. And something that we pondered was that how does one actually commemorate such momentous events? To continue in the spirit of our faculty and graduate students' efforts to push scholarship on the genocide in new directions, we decided to choose to focus on the state of Armenian studies, a field produced by the genocide itself. In order to highlight the attributes of our program, we have invited scholars and artists like Eric Bogosian, who have taken innovative approaches to the event itself, not only to render the Armenian case more palatable to larger audiences through different modes of expressions, such as the performing arts, but to also engage broader discussions on human rights, humanitarianism, and genocide studies. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our donors, in particular the Manoogian family, thanks to whom our program exists. The continued support of the Manoogians has made it possible for us to have Eric Bogosian here as a visiting artist scholar in residence, a 2-month stint for which we have partnered up with the Institute for the Humanities, and I would like to thank Sid Smith for organizing and partnering with us. The Institute of Humanities is providing an institutional home for Bogosian. I would like to also take this opportunity to announce that Eric Bogosian will do a few of his 100 monologues on Thursday, October 16th at 7:30 p.m. right here at the Museum of Art. So October 16th at 7:30 p.m. I would like to also thank the co-sponsorship of Screen Arts and Cultures, where Bogosian is teaching a couple of master classes. And I would also like to recognize the invisible labor of two people in particular who have made this event possible, Zana Kweiser and Naira Tumanyan. I would urge you to also go to our website, Armenian Studies at the University of Michigan, to follow our programming, and hopefully we'll be able to see you at many of these events. Our donor, actually the father, Alex Manoogian's story, is a familiar immigrant story of a genocide survivor from Izmir or Smyrna, situated on the Aegean coast of Anatolia. His is also a Michigan story, for Manoogian makes Detroit his home in 1924, attracted by the booming auto industry, and soon fulfills his American dream as an engineer. He was responsible for designing the faucet that allows us to have hot and cold water running from a single handle faucet, a ubiquitous fixture in our bathrooms and kitchens today. From a small machine shop in Detroit called the Masco Screw Products Company, the Manoogians made a fortune, and their philanthropy is a legacy that lives on as part of Detroit's cityscapes and part of this program of Armenian Studies at the University of Michigan. Eric Bogosian is another example of an Armenian-American success story. His grandparents were genocide survivors who settled in Massachusetts. Bogosian had a fascinating career and continues as a writer, actor, and now a historian. Born in Walborn, Massachusetts, of all dates, April 24th, he was bound to work on the genocide. He studied at Oberlin and then moved to New York City, this other American urban center, in the late 70s and early 1980s. Bogosian's career as a playwright and actor was launched with Radio Talk, which premiered Off Broadway at the Public Theater in May 1987. It was an instant hit. The same year, it was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and in 1988, he adapted it into a screenplay for Oliver Stone and received the Berlin Film Festival's Silver Bear Award. This would be his most challenging role, he says. He was in his 30s. It was a young man's job. He is so prolific that I don't know now, he's so prolific, what he was in the 30s as far as energy was concerned. The protagonist of talk radio is a talk show host, a shock jock, who engages in revealing rants with his callers. Bogosian's call-ins are a gallery of people, snapshots of American archetypes that give us a vivid picture of the fears and anxieties, the fantasies and fetishes of a range of characters which resonate with us. Talk radio is among his 6 solo plays: Men Inside, Funhouse, Drinking in America, Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll, Pounding Nails in the Floor with My Forehead, Ouch, and Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. His plays bring jocks, drug dealers, Hollywood producers, New Age gurus, rock stars, homeless men, and traveling salesmen to the stage, infusing each and every one of them with Bogosian's marked provocation and dark humor. His solos have generated a whole new genre of American theater. Characteristic of Bogosian's monologues, which you can both see in person on October 16th, right here. You can also read his book, which is of 100 monologues that he's collected together, that's come out this year, or coming out this year, as well as a great website of these 100 monologues, which is a work in progress. Everything played by other actors except for one, and I wonder one, Dunkin' Donuts ad?
Yes.
These are rare collections of portraits of contemporary Americans, mostly men, across different ages and social backgrounds. They are all, in some way, they share in their misogyny. Bar cruisers, bullies, sleazies, and sexist kind of guys. Even though they are macho male stereotypes, Bogosian captures their vulnerability and gives voice to these paranoid characters and their trouble with sex and money in America. From American dystopias, Bogosian has now turned to his Armenian identity, to explore the story of Simone Talarian, the man who on March 15th, 1921, nearly 100 years ago, assassinated the Ottoman Grand Vizier Talat Pasha in Berlin, one of the engineers of the Armenian genocide. Another survivor whose mother experienced a genocide, but who was acquitted by the German court and ended up dying in San Francisco in 1960 at the age of 63. Simone Talarian is an enigmatic figure. His story, along with that of his collaborators, the group Nemesis, has surprisingly remained in the dark, at least in the English language. There are some exceptions that Bogosian will talk to you about. For Bogosian, Talarian's story is a way of discovering his Armenian roots. The history of the genocide, his affinity with his grandparents who came from Kharbed and Istanbul, their stories and anecdotes, and I'm sure food had something to do with it. But how does one hear, listen, and give voice to the dead? This is the challenge of a historian. Let's hear about Bogosian's journey from suburbia to the genocide. Please join me in welcoming Eric Bogosian.
Thank you. This is from Saroyan. I wanted meat, hot and red, from off a spear held over a fire, or cooked in a pot with cabbage, okra, string beans, bell peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, or ground and mixed with cracked wheat and stuffed into tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, long, thin eggplants, bell peppers, or made into a meatball stuffed with fried onions, herbs, and pomegranate seeds. I wanted meat roasted and greasy with white rice or with the rice of cracked wheat. I wanted the sour milk of the Armenians, called by them madzun, by others yogurt, to eat by itself, or to put on stuffed cabbage, or to mix with cold cucumbers and chopped mint, to eat with the crisp, flat, white bread of the Armenians. I wanted my food with garlic, for then my thirst was greater than ever, and the water of Fresno was good. This is from Peter Balakian. My sisters Pam and Jan, my brothers Jim and I, never learned Armenian. In Tenafly, New Jersey in 1960, who would want to know Armenian, a language spoken by an ancient Near Eastern people who lived half a globe away and were now part of the Soviet Union? And finally, this is from Michael J. Arlen. This is when he's visiting Yerevan with his wife. My wife and I sat out alone on a kind of restaurant terrace. It was early evening, the sky still light. People were lined up opposite for a movie. I said, all along I've been trying to prove something, and it's not provable. But who said you have to prove anything, she said. That seemed sensible, although it was a hard idea to accept. I thought, people don't know anything about Armenians. Even Armenians don't seem to know about Armenians. So, Armenians, I'm going to be doing these 3 workshops here, and we're going to be reading prose, we're going to be looking at some films, and we're going to be looking at plays. And all of this work is, they're actually not all by Armenians. We're going to be looking at America by Kazan, but who I think is Armenian, but he never said he was Armenian. But then again, everyone is Armenian, according to my grandfather, because Noah's Ark landed in Ararat. You all know, anyone here who isn't Armenian, you will learn these things today, that you are Armenian. We're going to talk about where these various creative forces, how they try to communicate effectively the Armenian experience. And this is a real workshop. This is going to be a workshop for me as well as for anybody who comes to join us, because I don't have an answer to this question. I don't know how to communicate it, but I do look at these other people who've attacked this problem, and particularly, I don't think you can improve on Peter Balakian's book, Black Dog of Fate, but there are things that get shared between all of these artists and creative forces, and one is identity. What is an Armenian anyway? And the other is the genocide. These two things keep coming up again and again and again in the work. I don't know much about other national writings, and I don't know where those people focus, but I do know these things are particular to the writing that has to do with Armenians. And this, if we take just a quick look at these two areas, we find that they're highly problematic. Armenians. If you look it up in the encyclopedia someplace, you'll find some kind of statistic like there are 6 million Armenians in the world or something like that. There are 2 or 3 million Armenians in Armenia. There are 1.5 million Armenians in Yerevan. I get the part about the Armenians in Armenia because it's Armenia. But when you start talking about Armenians around the world, I'm not clear on who we're talking about exactly. I guess I'm one of the people who are counted. I certainly think of myself as an Armenian. My grandparents were all from Turkey. They all spoke Armenian. We went to the Armenian Apostolic Church. However, I don't speak Armenian, and I don't go to the church any longer. So in what way am I an Armenian? What are we talking about exactly? Are we talking about genetically I'm an Armenian? A lot of Armenians would like to think that. Unfortunately, there is no proof that there's any genetic distinction between Armenians and any of the other people who share that part of the world. Let's just say Anatolia or Asia Minor. It's a pretty blended population. Despite what you want to think, it's the case. It's just the way it is. And anybody who's been to, let's say, Istanbul, and you walk around and you go, that's that guy, see, he's an Armenian. I can tell he's an Armenian. You can see he's an Armenian. And that guy, you can see he's a Turk. But you're wrong 50% of the time. I mean, I have cousins who look like Turks, and I have met plenty of Turks who look like Armenians. So I don't even know what that even means. I guess Armenian means you have a kind of round face, and Turk means you have a kind of sharp-featured face, but that doesn't really hold. Or are we talking about where they come from? Well, that wouldn't apply to me because my family doesn't come from Armenia. My family comes from Turkey. And there are a lot of different Armenias. For those of you who aren't familiar with the history, Armenians moved around and they settled in different areas. And there's the Armenian Plateau, there's the area that is now called Armenia, there was Cilicia. These are all Armenias. And then there's all the people all around the world who are Armenians. We in the United States are chauvinistic to think that the way we see ourselves as Armenian Americans is the way all Armenians see themselves around the world who live in other countries, diasporan Armenians. But we're just not. It's just different. Moscow Armenians see themselves very differently than American, Southern California Armenians see themselves. And likewise, there's Armenians in Argentina and Bulgaria, and they're all over the place. So it's a problem. How do we even begin to say what is an Armenian? And the other part of the problem is, what is Armenia? And I'm not going to get into giving you a big lecture about all of that. I can see you all falling asleep already as I begin to approach this topic. But it's at least a place where creative people go to try to figure, this is the first thing they start, that bad. Wow, it's great. Just like, as soon as I started, he's gone. It's always people who sit in the front row who have to get up and leave while the thing is going on. This is the part I don't get. No, he's the photographer. That's why he's walking around. I just want you to know that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it that when people want to start writing about the Armenian experiences, they want to write about, they don't want to write about it, but they have to write about, thank you, that's great. That's great, sugar. The genocide. And I think a lot of people agree with me that I don't want to define Armenians by the genocide. I think that's a problem. I mean, you can't even really define Armenians with Christianity, because then you would have to leave out all the Armenians that existed before 300 AD. They wouldn't be Armenians. So you can't even say that an Armenian is a Christian, that's how you define Armenians. And likewise, I don't want to define Armenians by this horrible tragedy that happened in 1915, 1916. But you can't leave it out either. It's essential to understanding who we are. And it, as with the Jewish Holocaust, it forced definition even when people didn't want to be defined. I don't know if that was so much true with the Armenians. It was definitely true with many Jews living in Germany who were beginning to lose their sense of even being Jewish, and then they were unfortunately reminded that they were Jewish in the worst possible way. As an artist, as a person who writes or makes film or writes poetry or paints, and being of this heritage, it's almost impossible to not want to speak into this place. You have to address it. And part of the reason why you have to address it is because of the denial. The denial that has continued since the genocide happened to now is like being shoved repeatedly. And if you are an artist, you must you're active. You must be active in the environment that you're in, and so you must shove back. Now, this is the way I look at things today, and what I want to do is take you back to how I got to this spot, because that's sort of, I guess, roughly what I'm going to be talking about today, is my own little personal journey. Like I say, Peter Balakian pretty much covers the the growing up as an Armenian American. So I don't need to get too much into, you know, the plates of food with the macaroni and cheese and the dolma on the same plate. That's kind of, you know, we've heard that story, and that was my life too. I also grew up in a household where I was not taught Armenian, and so again, there was this disconnect. I grew up in a situation where nobody seemed to be clear where Armenia was. I don't know why nobody knew, but nobody could really answer that question for me. I mean, it was easy to find Italy on a map. It was that boot, and I had a lot of little Italian friends, but you couldn't, we didn't, you know, just didn't know. I grew up in a household, and this isn't everyone's experience, but I grew up in a household where one of the people, my grandfather, was about as a survivor as you can be a survivor, because he was a young man. He was in his late teens in 1915, and he got out of there when things were coming down. I don't know how he did it. The family mythology says that he was working for the telephone company. I don't know that there was a telephone company at that time in Harput, but there was a telegraph, and so maybe he worked on telegraph, and that's why he was valuable enough to have been able to hang in there long enough. All I know is that I have the paperwork of him crossing through France on his way to the United States. His story has got a particularly tragic angle to it that I didn't know until I started working on this book, which was that his father had actually come over earlier in the 1890s, Ovagin, and Ovagin became an American citizen. A lot of people, Armenians and others, felt that if they could establish American citizenship, this would be some kind of pass when they went back into the old country. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and when he went back, he was, I can only assume he was captured or drafted into the army, and he was never seen again. So his American citizenship didn't count for anything. And his son, Megardich, my grandfather, got his mother out of there, and they both got to Watertown, Mass., which is where I spent my first years growing up. So that man, Megardich, would tell me stories when I was very small of what had happened as he was growing up. And he would tell me about the village burning and hiding in the field and churches burning. And he would always end his stories by telling me, if you ever meet a Turk, kill him. And he's talking to a 4-year-old. He's telling me this stuff, okay? I'm only telling you that because you can, this is like in me. It's in me. This isn't something I'm having a choice about as a little kid. This isn't like there's a TV show when I can switch channels. This is my grandfather, who I love more than anybody, telling me these things. And I was an acolyte in church, and I went to church every Sunday. And then we moved to Woburn, Massachusetts, where there were all these kids who were not Armenian. There were no Armenians in the town. And I grew up around kids who made me feel very different. And I didn't like feeling different. I didn't look like them. My skin was darker than theirs. My hair wasn't anything like, and no one had ever seen hair like mine in their lives. They had to come and touch it. It was really, even my Armenian eyes were a liability, because the kids in my town like to hit each other a lot. I don't know what this deal is with Irish Catholic kids. Maybe it's a particular type of Irish Catholic kid, but they love to hit each other. And they love to hit the kid who looks vulnerable, and my big eyes were just an invitation to getting beat all the time. So I didn't like this. I didn't like this thing. And yet it was deeply set within me, this love of my family, the food, just the love. I mean, this was a classic extended Armenian family with 1 million cousins. And so I kept moving between these two dimensions as I was growing up. And I kept the whole Armenian thing at arm's length. It started to compartmentalize within me, and I kind of hardened it into just a space within me. And this is this space, it's this place, it's very far away, and it's a long time ago, and really bad things happened there. I'm not even sure what. I have a rough idea that was very violent. and it has something to do with food and shish kebab and choreg and stuff, but all of this is sort of blended together into Armenian, and then it just stays there in a hard ball, and then I go out into the world, and I'm just an American kid smoking pot and protesting the Vietnam War, and that's who I am. And then there's this other thing that I don't really even explain to people. People don't seem to even want to know about it. And then I started to understand as I was an actor that I was ethnic, and that meant that I had to be an ethnic actor, or that I had some kind of quality that wasn't seen as American, which is kind of funny because recently I was actually cast and signed a contract for a TV show called Blacklist to play one of the bosses in the show, and at the last minute they pulled the contract. And they said, they've decided to go ethnic. And I said, I am ethnic. And they said, no, ethnic is code for black. And if you watch the show, you'll see Harry Lennox, he's a terrific actor, playing the role that I should be playing. No, he's really great. I don't need to be a detective anymore, or a boss, or any of that stuff. At any rate, things started to come to a head in the 1980s. I got a little success. I got signed by the William Morris Agency, and burned into my brain is my lunch with my William Morris agent in Beverly Hills, who leans across to me at the table and says, you have a lot of talent, you have a big future in this business, but you have to change your last name, straighten your hair, and get your nose fixed. And I did change my last name. It used to be McGillicuddy, and I got my nose fixed. It was much smaller before, and I got it enlarged. But at any rate, it became a point of pride, particularly my last name, which today people seem to not have the problems with Armenian last names as they did in the 1980s or 70s or 60s. They found them unpronounceable. They would just see that they couldn't do anything with it, couldn't say it, constantly mispronounced. So I sort of fought my way through this. I started to have shows off Broadway, and there were nice things that happened, and there were not nice. I mean, it was really something when, first of all, my shows, if anybody comes on, when I do and it's not going to be just I'm going to do a dozen of these things on that night. But these monologues are pretty, what you call in the entertainment world, blue. There's like a lot of dirty language in it. And my first ones were really raw, and we're talking 1983. And I remember the priest bringing the whole gang down from the east side to come and see and everybody dutifully sitting there, little old ladies sitting there with their hands folded. I don't think anybody even heard a word I said. They just were so happy that an Armenian was on a stage and his name was on the marquee outside the theater. And I didn't really know what to do with this. They would have Q&As, and they always had to do with being Armenian and not being Armenian, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm Armenian, I'm American too, and that didn't go over very big with people. They didn't want to hear about that stuff. I did a run in LA in '85, and of course a lot of Armenians in LA, and people would come to the show, and that has always like a particular, Armenians are really amazing in some of the things they can say to you, to come backstage and go, it was a very nice show today, Mr. Bogosian. I enjoyed it very much. I too also do theater. It's a lot better than your theater, but yours is good. It's good what you are doing. I can help you out with it if you want. It's like, just kill me now. Get this guy out of here. So there was that. There was that part of it. But I still had that sort of lockdown idea about what it means to be Armenian. It's something happening a long time ago, Choreg, Madzun, this is Armenian. And then everything broke apart in the 90s for me. It was a series of different things, and it's worth noting them because it's important that we make work, we artists or writers or filmmakers, because it affects other people.
I mean, there's plenty of work out there to see at any given moment. We don't ever have to make another painting or write another book. We could spend the next 200 years reading all the books that already exist, but they have to address what's happening right now. And that's why you have to keep making work. And certainly the story of the Armenians is a story that is even more important to talk about today, given what's been going on just in the last few months in the Middle East. Well, at any rate, in the 90s, I read Peter's book, Black Dog of Fate, and I read the part about the macaroni and cheese next to the dolma, and I read the part about not speaking Armenian, and I see it's me that he's writing about. And then I'm in Adam Agoyan's film Ararat. And there was a moment I'm playing a film writer in the movie, and we're on the set of we are dramatizing, or he's dramatizing, Van and the battle that went on in Van. So we had all these actors all over the place who were dressed up in period clothing, and they're just hanging around. They're actors, like smoking cigarettes and stuff and eating their lunch and whatnot. But they were they were dressed. They had completely imitated this town. And as I walked through, I was just killing time. Something just flew into me, and it just changed me in that moment. I saw my people, I saw what had happened, and it hit me very hard. Maybe even harder because these were actors who I knew weren't these people. At the same time, the wars were going on in the 90s in the Balkans, and I would watch the evening news, and I would see these refugees streaming out of these towns and all the violence against them. And again, all of a sudden, it hit me. I'm looking at my own people. I'm looking at what happened to my grandparents when they had to leave where they had lived, where their families had lived for hundreds of years. And something started to move inside of me, and I knew that I had to write something and make something. I had been asked many times, almost any time I did a performance, somebody would come back and say, when are you going to make the 40 Days of Musa Da? Now, we have to understand, I'm not a producer and I'm not a director, so I can't make this movie, but I liked the 40 Days of Musa Da by Franz Werfel, and for those of you who are not familiar with this book, the 40 Days of Musa Da is a story about a bunch of Armenians, a small area that it was based on a true story that collects up on this mountain and fights the Turks off until they can be rescued around the time of the genocide. Franz Werfel wrote this book in 1933. He was, at the time, it was the rise of Nazism he was Austrian in Germany, and in a way, he was sort of writing about that at the same time he was writing about the Armenians. The book is one of the most popular books of the 20th century, and like all the popular books from that period, MGM was going to make a movie of it. They locked down the rights. They started hiring writers and hiring directors and thinking about who was going to play this character. It's all this one central guy who's in the thick of all of this. And the Turkish government found out about it, and they got in touch with Irving Thalberg, and they said, don't make this movie. This is not a movie you want to make. And Irving Thalberg said, go jump off a cliff. So they got in touch with the State Department, and the State Department got in the thick of it, and the State Department, in their own cowardly way, used the Hayes Commission to shut down the production, and the production was shut down. The movie was never made. And this was a major Hollywood movie that never got made because of pressure from the Turkish government on the United States government. The story of why all that is going on at that particular time is beyond what I can talk about today. You can read my book. There's stuff in there about oil politics and just the politics in general between the United States and Turkey. But at any rate, the movie never got made, and a lot of people thought that I would somehow be able to make it. But when I looked at the 40 Days of Musa Da, which is a great book, I couldn't see a movie there. Now, it may seem to anybody who doesn't write screenplays that, well, of course there's a movie there. I mean, it's just filled with drama. Well, maybe a movie in the 1940s, but not a movie that we're going to go see today. I mean, it's just too much. The bad guys, the good guys, the bad guys are the Turks, the good guys are these poor Armenians on top of the hill. I mean, I can imagine it with, you know, Walter Pidgeon in it or something, but I can't imagine it today, making it today. So, but it stayed in my mind, like, where is there, what can I do? Is there a play I can write? Is there a movie I can write? And then somebody tells me this story about a young Armenian assassin who had killed the leader of the Turks in Berlin and was acquitted. And I'm like, yeah, really? What? And I didn't know the story of Talarian. And I didn't even think it was a true story when I first heard it. I thought it was some kind of Armenian fantasy urban myth. Then it gets repeated again in Samantha Power begins her book, Problem from Hell, about genocide. It's the first story in her book. And then Peter mentions it in his book. And so I started to understand that this was a true story, and I looked up the trial online, and you can find the trial online, and there's the whole story. The story's very simple. Solomon Talarian, he is this young man who's deported out of his village in Erzincan, and like all the deportations, there's all this violence. He sees his mother murdered right before his eyes. He sees his brothers murdered. He sees his father gets killed. And he doesn't get killed. He ends up lying in a pile of corpses, and he tells the story in different ways, but in a couple of days, all the army is gone, and he escapes through Iran and escapes. Years later, he's in Berlin, and many of these Turkish leaders are in exile. They're hiding from the British all over Europe, and Talat Pasha is in Berlin. Talarian sees Talat Pasha walking down the street one day and has these nightmares. His mother comes to him and says, how can you let this guy live? You have to kill him. So he gets a hold of a pistol and he shoots Talat with one shot and kills him. He's immediately arrested, and there's this huge trial that people all over the world read about it. It was in the New York Times. It was all over the place. And then he's acquitted because the German judge and jury believe that this man has a right if well, they don't say he has a right, but they feel that he's been traumatized by the experience of seeing his mother and his family killed, his mother's head chopped off right in front of him. Of course, if he sees the guy responsible, we have to let him go. That's what the New York Times headline said the next day when they acquitted him. They had to let him go, and they did. And that's the story. That's not the true story. Now, I read this story, and I thought this is going to be a great movie. First part, they're on the caravan. I can explicate the Armenian genocide in this first act about the kinds of things that happened during the deportations. Second act, poor Armenian student in Berlin sees this former guy. I mean, the drama. I mean, there I'm seeing drama, right? And then he gets a gun and he shoots him. Last act, trial. I mean, what's better than that? End with a trial. He gets acquitted. Hooray. Everybody's kissing each other, and it's the end of the story. It's great. Unfortunately, it's not a true story, and the story is true that he killed Talat, and it is true that he was acquitted, but everything he said in court was a fabrication. He was actually a member of an assassination squad operating out of Watertown, Massachusetts, called themselves Operation Nemesis, and they went into, they sent commandos all over Europe, Rome, Constantinople, Berlin again. They went back to Berlin and got 2 more guys in Berlin. And they killed at least 8 major Turkish leader guys. And it was a large group. There were something like 9 armed assassins in the group, as well as all of their support structure and the leadership and the coordinators and the money men here in the United States. So when I heard, how did I know this? Well, because there are a few books out there, like Catherine said. There's a book by Jacques de Rogy, which was written in France, came out in France in the 1980s, called Resistance and Revenge. And there's a couple of other scattered things. Also, Operation Nemesis was the child of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, or the ARF, and they, over the years, wanted people to know about this and sort of didn't want people to. I mean, let's face it, it's Murder Incorporated. It's not legal what they were doing. It's not legal to form groups of guys to go and kill people. And so there is no statute of limitations on murder, and so they kind of had to keep it on the down low. At the same time, want people to know about it. So one way to do this is to publish books in Armenian or go on television and talk in Armenian about it. And slowly but surely the story leaked out, and eventually all of the men who were the major assassins were old and passed away. And so there really wasn't, as long as everybody else could hide their tracks, and then basically everybody was gone. And then the story fully came out. So then I didn't understand how to write the screenplay based on this. It was too complicated. And as the more I got involved in it, the more I started to learn about the ARF, and that's a complicated story, and the history of Armenia, and the period of Armenian, the First Republic, which is around 1919, 1920, how Armenia became part of the Soviet Union. What was the Ottoman Empire anyway, and what does that even mean, Ottoman Empire? World War I, it started to get very complicated, Russia. So I made the mistake of deciding to write this book 7 years ago, and I have spent 7 years researching this. The hardest part about it is coming up with a structure. My original structure was to tell the Nemesis story as a narrative and then sort of have sidebars that would explain all these other things, like, okay, Armenia was the first country that was Christian. Okay, so I'll have like a sidebar on that, or a footnote, or an appendix, or what. I tell you, it made my head spin. We now have a finished book. It's coming out in Little Brown in April. I'm working with a wonderful editor, and we've somehow lined up all the facts and gotten all the parts together. It's been very difficult. I've had wonderful support from Aram Arkun and other, Mark Manoogian and Ted Bogosian, and a number of other people have helped me. Particularly Aram has been there for me as a translator, because we translated the Talarian's memoirs, which came out in the mid-50s in Cairo, only available in Armenian. And so Aram went through the entire book and translated it for me. And while we were working together on that, every time I had a question about, I mean, he's a walking encyclopedia, this guy, so I would say, I don't understand. What is this? What is Tanzimat? What is Amira class? What is this? What is that? I mean, then I have the next part of my problem, and it was that, okay, I kind of know all of these things, but I have to, I mean, this is not going to be a 16-volume set on Operation Nemesis. It has to be a volume that somebody can, I want the book to be read by a popular audience. I want people to look at this as almost like one of those really long Vanity Fair articles. Like, honey, did you know this about salt? It's really interesting. I didn't know this about salt. You know, so, because that's the way most people, and you know, working on this project, it has astounded me what people don't know about Armenians and about the Armenian genocide. This area has been covered many times. I have two of the major books right here in front of me. I have Michael J. Arlen's book, where he explicates all of this stuff, the history of the Armenians, Turkey, the political stuff, all of that's in there. And then Peter Balakian does it again, and then he does it again with the Burning Tigris. It's all there if you want to go find it. But I did know that I want to be, I don't want to sound egotistical about this, but I'm a poker player, okay? You can only play the cards as they lie. The cards as they lie today is that nobody really knows these stories. When I say nobody, I mean when you go up to the average person and you start to talk to them about this, they'll start telling you what Hillary Clinton said 2 years ago, that it's a historical debate, we're not really sure if there was a genocide or not. It drives you crazy, especially if you've done the kind of research that I've done, because my little hardened ball of Armenian knowledge of this sort of, you know, massacres in villages, which was what I thought had happened. I then learned of one of the great crimes in the history of the world that's equivalent to, maybe not in scale, but equivalent to the Nazis and what they did to the Jews. We're talking about a criminal enterprise in a government that specifically sets out to eradicate a group of people in its country. And these aren't even people that are causing any real trouble. There's a few revolutionaries, but most of the people are what they call the loyal millet. They were law-abiding. Most of them are peasants, actually. And so you have a genuine crime here, and there's no debate about it. There's no debate at all. And yet I've had conversations, forget about the regular people, regular average people. Let's talk about major New York intellectuals who I, will sit there and have arguments with. I won't name names, but, well, it wasn't a genocide because they didn't kill anybody in Constantinople. Where is that coming from? Where is this information coming from? This is the Turkish information, the disinformation. I don't know, I don't really need to lecture you guys on denialist literature or any of that, but just a few points are worth looking at. Turkey officially continues to deny the Armenian genocide. They can talk all they want about apologies and the other kinds of things the way they like to reshape it. But the actual genocide, that is a concerted effort by the government, it's not on the table. And genocide is key here because genocide is a legal term, and if the term like genocide ever gets out there, then there's all kinds of legal things that can happen, especially because people know there's all kinds of property and things that were taken at the time. But this is not just something that comes out in a press release out of the government of Turkey. This is a propaganda campaign that, forget about the people outside of Turkey, the people in Turkey honestly believe that there wasn't a genocide, that Armenians were these nasty group of people that caused some trouble and were moved away from the border and some bad things happened to them. And anybody who goes counter to that is some crazy nasty Armenian, so that just proves you're nasty, that you're even continuing with this genocide myth. If you go to Istanbul and you go to Topkapi, which is, in the palace of the sultans for hundreds of years, next to it is a museum, and that museum is called the Museum of Anatolian Archaeology or something along those lines. It's a really big museum. In this museum is the history of Anatolia going all the way back to prehistory to the present. You will not see the word Armenian anywhere mentioned in that museum, anywhere, any place. There isn't just one museum like this in Turkey. There are 50 museums like this in Turkey, supported by the government, built by the government, and every little school child goes off and goes to these museums and learns history, or what they think is history. So this stuff needs to keep, I feel that it's worthwhile. I've gotten completely off my point, but my point is that despite the fact that other people have addressed this stuff, I know that I have a slightly different relationship to the world at large. One, I'm this guy that was on Law and Order 60 times. And for some reason, somebody might go, oh, I'm going to read that book because Eric Bogosian wrote it. Maybe it'll say something about Vincent D'Onofrio in there. Oh, it's about Armenians, okay. Also, I'm at a point in my career and in my life where, honestly, I'm not the bravest guy in the world, and do I walk into this and then what happens? I start getting attacked by Turks about, trying to mess with me, hurt my career. Is somebody going to try and hurt my children? And I know now, just from other people's stories, that it may not only be Turks who will want to come after me for the information in this book, because I don't just talk about Nemesis, I talk about Asala and the Justice Commandos and other things that have happened in this history. I'm not a historian, but I don't see the point in telling these stories without telling all the stories. Good, bad, it's all in there. And so I know that there's a possibility for harassment, but I'm at a place now where they can't hurt me that way. My children aren't little kids anymore, they're grown men, and I don't think they can do anything to me in my career in Hollywood because I don't have a career in Hollywood, so they can't do anything to me there anymore. So that's the story of putting this all together. Many years ago, there was a theater critic in New York named Clive Barnes, and Clive Barnes would say all kinds of stuff about all sorts of things. He was one of these theater critics you read just to see how nasty he can be on any given day. And around that time, I remember he came up with a really nasty, this is the mid-70s, really nasty review of somebody, and people were just up in arms. And he said, look, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but mine is an informed opinion. And so it has more value. Regarding this information that's in my book, I am going to stand by it and tell you, look, I don't know everything. And if you have any points you want to make with me, I'm open, I'm all ears. The book is still in its last editing phase. However, mine is an informed opinion. I have dedicated myself for 7 years to read every single thing I can read. I've interviewed people all around the world. I've interviewed from Glendale, Silva Manoogian, all the way to Paris, to Raymond Kevorkian. I've sat with people, I've talked, I've dug out every little thing I can find. Not that I'm going to get every little fact exactly right, that's almost impossible. But one thing does happen. When you keep reviewing the material over and over and over again, patterns start to rise up and become apparent. For one thing, the story of Operation Nemesis is clouded with all kinds of myths that were generated by the ARF. So how do we deal with the facts as they tell us these facts? Are they facts? Did this really happen? Didn't this happen? But if you go through 20 of these narratives, and if you use logic, you can start to pick out how this makes sense or how this might have happened. Honestly, I think there are parts we'll never know. But there are a lot of patterns and things that I can see in the story. For example, Armenian Talarian was the youngest of a bunch of brothers, and those brothers went off with his father to Serbia in I think 1905. So he was a little boy, and his dad was gone, and his brothers were gone. So who was he? He was a little boy living in a house with women, with his mom. What does that tell you? That's a mama's boy. That's a little boy who's like the baby of the family. His mother is his universe. His father isn't part of his universe. This young man then finds out while he's in the army, in fact, he actually enters the town that he used to live in, and he sees it's been destroyed and all the population is gone. He can only assume, he doesn't know for sure, that his mother has been killed by the Turks. This becomes all he can think about. He has nightmares, endless nightmares about his mother, and he has to find some way to close this, and he becomes obsessed with Talat and killing Talat. He called Talat the monster. The reason I'm telling you this is because understanding this man and looking at him psychologically as he moves towards this assassination takes us in a different route than, let's say, looking at Sharagian, who killed Said Halim in Rome. Sharagian is a much younger. He's a gun runner in Constantinople for the ARF underground during the war. He's a young man who loves action, loves fights, volunteers to go after these guys. Different kind of personality, and it's all part of the storytelling. These are the kind of things that I learned. I came up with some stuff that hasn't been seen anywhere else. It was right there for anybody who wanted to go looking for it, but I guess nobody felt like going to look for it. In some of the Turkish literature, which I choose to sit and read it. A lot of it's complete bull, but sometimes you see little things. One of the things you'll see, I think it's actually in Wikipedia, it'll say that it was that the British assisted the Armenians in the assassination of Talat. What about that? So I pulled on that thread and I came up with this guy, Aubrey Herbert. And it's too long a story to tell you all this now, but I am absolutely convinced, and it's in my book, that Aubrey Herbert, who, as far as I can tell, historically was a spy. He's never been called a spy directly, but was a spy. He was attached to the British embassy in Constantinople before the war. He knew Talat. Aubrey Herbert was the man who basically put things in motion for Talat's assassination. How did that happen? Talat wanted to make a contact with Britain, and he got in touch with Aubrey Herbert in 1919, and in 1921, Scotland Yard, knowing that Talat was trying to make some kind of contact with Britain, encouraged Aubrey Herbert to meet with Talat. He did, and during that meeting, Talat explained that the Young Turks, who at this point are in exile, Kemal is fighting in the east, all over Anatolia, but these guys see themselves as sort of representatives of this new Republic of Turkey, which doesn't exist yet. Talat tells Herbert that this team, this group of Young Turks, loves the British, would love to get in bed with them again, as they had been long before the war. But if that doesn't happen, they're perfectly happy to start an Islamic revolution against the British in all over the place, and wherever there is Islam, particularly in the area of Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan and all other areas like that, and in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, Persia, so forth. He tells him this. This entire interview is in a book. It constitutes a whole chapter in Aubrey Herbert's memoirs, and it's all there to read. Well, at any rate, he sits down and we found his journals in the British archives. We found out what happened after he met with Talat. He went back, he was debriefed by Scotland Yard, and Talat was dead about 12 days later. It's kind of hard not to see cause and effect there. The truth is, which we also found, and I say we, I had people doing research for me in England, we found that the British knew exactly where Talat was living months and months earlier. And so it seems to make sense that the British want to get rid of Talat, and they know an easy way to do it. Just give him his address to the Armenians who they know are floating around in Berlin looking for him. According to the memoirs of Talarian and other stuff that was written by ARF people from this period, there's some kind of telegram comes from Geneva, which is where the ARF is centered, a few days before Talat is killed, confirming that the man who lives in 4 Hardenbergstrasse is Talat Pasha. But maybe that isn't what the telegram said. Maybe the telegram just said, the man who lives at 4 Hardenbergstrasse is Talat Pasha, not confirming anything because they hadn't found him yet. All we know is that he was dead a few days later. So that's just one of the things that, from my research and working, the kind of things that sort of bubble up, sort of like developing a photograph. You just keep looking at it over and over and over again, and it starts to, this sort of truth starts to come up. Not all the truths are truths that you necessarily want to know about. Sometimes they're hard things to swallow. The ARF and the Young Turks saw themselves sort of on par. And that's a whole story in itself, which is also in the book, but something to look at about why attacks are made on each other. One of the things about Operation Nemesis, and I think I'll sort of wrap it up on Operation Nemesis with this, but is that you have to look at, like any, because I have a lot of experience as a law enforcement professional, you have to look at, when somebody gets killed, who benefits. And it isn't just Talat who gets killed at this time. Talat Pasha is assassinated, Jamal Pasha is assassinated. They're both assassinated by Nemesis. And Enver Pasha is assassinated or hunted down and killed by the Soviets. That takes out the triumvirate who were running the Ottoman Empire during World War I. And other top guys get killed as well by Nemesis. Who benefits? Mustafa Kemal, also known as Ataturk, benefits. He doesn't want these guys back in his country. He's going to be the new leader of the Turks, and he doesn't want them coming back. Is this an agreement that happened between the British and Kemal? There's no way to prove that. However, Aubrey Herbert is on a mission from Churchill just a couple of weeks after Smyrna to go meet with Kemal to start talking about, well, there's really only one thing to talk about, and that's oil, because the British have now taken Mesopotamia, or what we now call Iraq, and in fact, Kemal never contends with them over this territory, very wealthy territory. So there's all kinds of oil stuff going on here as well, and that's also in my book. But I think it is worth looking at. Isn't it interesting how all the people who could possibly be contenders for the throne in Turkey are out of the picture by the time that part of the war was over, which is the Turkish nationalists' war. I've reached my limit of ability to bore you, so I'm going to just. I do want to read one last part here. It was something I wrote for the book. I don't even know if it's going to be in the book. But I just want to say that I wrote this book because I had to write it. I've never spent so much time on anything in my life. It's been an incredible experience for me to work on this book, and I actually don't know how well it will work as a book or won't work as a book. Certainly as an explication of the Armenian experience, like I say, I wouldn't even put myself in the same category as a Balakian, and even Michael J. Arlen, despite his self-hatred, is a wonderful writer. But going back to what I was saying earlier about just being an artist, I mean, why? Why even write this book? Why does this have to be talked about? Why do we have to revisit the genocide and these things that happened 100 years ago? I was a witness to 9/11, and because I only live a few blocks away from there, I saw a lot of people die on that day, and when they died, and after they fell from the buildings and the buildings collapsed down on them, they couldn't find them. It was anonymous death. And that, in my mind, if you've ever seen Ted Bogosian's film, which we'll be showing which was from the 80s, of people visiting the region around Deir Zor and putting their hands into the soil, and there's fragments of bones there from the people who died in the concentration camps there in 1915, 16. What do we do with this anonymous death? I think that anonymous death is the greatest transgression that you can have. And I had to focus on this and think about it. I'm just going to read what I wrote, then we can do some Q&A stuff. And so memory and retribution are linked. But why? Why is it so important to remember what happened? All people who live will die someday, and in a few generations, most of us will be forgotten altogether. So why does it make any difference whether the details of our particular deaths are remembered, violent or not? Perhaps the answer lies in the very fact that we do all die, that no one cheats death. We come into this world with nothing, and we leave with nothing. We all know, either implicitly or explicitly, that all we really have is our place in the memories of others. We exist to the degree that we know and remember one another, even the most isolated among us. We share a collective understanding that we are all part of a greater whole. Perhaps we will not be remembered as individuals, but we, the living, move through life surrounded by what the dead have left for us. The dead live on in the pages of thousands of books, in the bricks of countless buildings, in the flashing shadows of old movies, in virtually everything we see and touch, including our own children. For this reason, we must respect the dead and give them their due, because in fact they are everything, and we will join them soon enough. It is this contract of respect we have with those who have gone before us that demands we acknowledge how they died, and if they died violently, to seek redress. The question that is almost impossible to answer is, what can we do if those who committed the original crime go unpunished? What if those who follow in the footsteps of those who committed the original crime insist on hiding the truth? What then? This book is an attempt at an answer, not only by providing the facts as best we know them, but through research and authorship, and including you as the reader. In that way, we honor those hundreds of thousands who were condemned to anonymous death and burial. And so that's what this has been. This is where my journey has taken me. I just want to acknowledge and respect my own heritage, and this is the way I've done it. So
that's all I've got for you today. Thank you very much. We're going to do, or not? Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
Have you learned to speak or read Armenian?
No.
Interested?
I am interested because I know that it exists in me. I tell you, the reason I'm interested is not so much from a position of like, it'd be great to speak Armenian, or I guess we're talking about Western Armenian, because that was the Armenian that my grandparents spoke. That's what I know, what little I know. It's just because this detective story that I've been involved in, you know, to be able to read Armenian, I mean, you can go in the library here and you will see for every 2 books, there are 4 books that are in Armenian, and I wish I could read them. But I don't know, I'm 61 years old. We'll put that on my bucket list. Hi.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for this. You are a master storyteller, and I enjoyed every bit of it. To go back to your opening remarks of who decides for us about our identity, I think the simplest answer for that would be an Armenian is someone who says, I am an Armenian. Would you agree with that?
Sure. You know I'm Armenian. I've raised my boys so that they know they're Armenian. I don't think they can think of themselves as anything but Armenian. But my Armenian is different than their Armenian. My Armenian includes a grandfather who told me stories. Theirs doesn't include that, even though I've told them plenty. I have a part of me that, not just because of any kind of bad feelings or anything about being Armenian, which I don't have anymore. I definitely don't have those feelings anymore. But I do have feelings about nationalism in general, and you know, I have nothing in common with the Harputsi from 150 years ago. I have more in common with a contemporary German Turk than I do with that guy. I mean, we're both Armenians, but the guy from 150 years ago was a peasant living in a place without refrigeration. I live today in this world. These get into much deeper questions about what is identity and how do we decide who we are as people. And of course, a big part of it is these structures like calling yourself something, saying, I am this. The whole idea of nationalism, you don't need me to give you a lecture on this, but nationalism is a relatively recent invention, and in my work, I mean, just looking at, you could write a whole book about Armenians in newspapers, because newspapers have a lot to do with nationalism, and how newspapers write about people was a big part of what was happening around World War I. So all of this, I have to say I take it with a grain of salt. But that is part of the problem. What you just brought up is the thing that all of these authors are trying to get at, and it becomes a perennial issue. You can say that's what it is, I am an Armenian, but then what does that mean? Soroyan takes a position, whenever he writes, he's always saying things like, the Armenians do this, the part that I read you, the Armenians. So who's he talking about? He's Armenian. He's more Armenian than me. And so why does he do that? Because he's thinking about who his audience is, and he's assuming that it's a non-Armenian audience, and that he's going to introduce you to Armenians. Here they are, these wonderful people with their grape leaves and yogurt and stuff. And and so all of these people are trying to get at, what does that mean to be Armenian? I think we feel it, and I agree with you that I can say I am Armenian, but I think it is a mistake to think that that possession is always the same with everybody, and that we can just instantly believe that we can just like integrate with another group. I mean, the great example is when Adam made Ararat, and he and Arsenet were going to Armenia, and he was just like, he was just full of vim and vigor about this, going back to the homeland, the Armenians and everything. And I said, Adam, you know, they're not going to look at you as an Armenian. They're going to look at you as an affluent first worlder, because that's what you are. Those guys don't have any money over there. They're going to look, and he was surprised by the cultural kind of disconnects that were happening. They weren't just about economics, they were about a lot of things, because he's different. Probably my best friend in New York today is an Armenian from Yerevan, and I love hanging around with this guy, but man, we're really different. I mean, contemporary Armenian, a guy he's about 50, he's been here for over 20 years. I mean, he served in the Soviet army. That alone makes you a very different person than everybody. Soviet army. Just, anyway, long enough answer with that. I don't even know if that's an answer. Hi.
Aubrey, it was just an excellent speech. Thank you very much. I don't know if you know this, but Soghomon Talarian's great-grandniece lives in the Detroit area. She's an immigration attorney. I thought you might like to know about Lisa Talarian.
Thank you. Yeah, all these guys had children and grandchildren, and they kind of, they're all over the place. A very interesting grandchild is Aaron Shachaklian's granddaughter, and her book will come out on Nemesis in January. He never told his family that he was the finance organizer for Operation Nemesis, and just never told them. She did tell me, I interviewed, her name is Marion McCurdy. I interviewed Marion at length, and she said, you know, when she was little, they would go into an Armenian restaurant, and they always had the best table, and all the food was free for them, always. Because, of course, people knew who this guy was. When he died, then his wife died more recently, and she had a pile of letters and writings that these grandchildren got a hold of, and they translated them, and they are the inner workings of Nemesis, including all kinds of accounting and so forth. So that transaction is publishing that book in January. Transaction, in their wisdom, decided that I shouldn't see any of it, so I haven't been allowed to look at any of that material, but I don't care. I mean, there's going to be a lot of books coming out in the next year, and I hope you buy them all and look at them all, because I think they all work together to look at that stuff. But that's another child, progeny. Uh-oh, here comes the tough question.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. Talking of identity, I totally, of course, understand why it is important for you as an Armenian to fight against the denial and acknowledge the dead, because they say denial is the last step of genocide, in the sense that you need to be able to mourn the suffering, to be able to move on, and of course reinvest your faith in humanity again, and you cannot do that if there is that denial. But of course, in that context, I mean, your identity as an Armenian is important because of that lack of acknowledgement. Just as my identity as an ethnic Turk is important because of the perpetration, and you know, for that denial to be there in the first place. And you know, one thing, of course, we don't talk about is what this denial has done to Turkey. But what this denial has done to Turkey, I mean, it has normalized violence in Turkey, so that, you know, the Turkish moral fabric has been destroyed as a consequence for the lack of accountability. So I just wanted to point out that, you know, reading your book, hopefully it'll be translated into Turkish, will also tell people there, you know, the consequences of the lack of accountability that they had to, you know, that they perpetrated in the first place. Having said that, of course, I work on this, as you know. Two things about what you said. With respect to Talat being found out, I have looked at the Turkish memoirs of people written when the Young Turks were in exile. And it turns out there are a couple of them. One that avoids being assassinated is Dr. Nazim. And he is very paranoid. And he basically changes his location every like two weeks, so that nobody can like pin him down really, including all the intelligence units. But they constantly tell Talat that he is being too easygoing and he is taking things too easy and he's going to be assassinated, so that they know that among all of them he is going to be the first one to go. So I thought, you know, that would be important to figure out. And with respect to Talarian, there is also some information. It turns out from, I guess, what they learned, the Turkish community in Berlin learned, is that he did it a couple of times. I mean, he tracked him down a couple of times as he took a walk in the park at exactly the same time every day. And then that day was the day it was most opportune to carry it out, so that, you know, there is obviously sort of, you know, a whole background there. And then what happens is that the sons of one of the people around goes to the actual police station to identify Talat. And then Talarian is there, and then he attacks Talarian and tries to like beat him up and everything. So yeah, there is also that.
Why didn't you tell me this before I wrote the book? You knew I was writing the book.
Well, I can still send you the information since I have it all
Send it to me.
translated. Yeah.
No, we have time. I knew the first thing that you were saying there. I've seen memos of how they're writing between themselves, saying, you know, watch out. And indeed, Aubrey Herbert, in his last, he spent a whole 2 days with Talat talking to him. And he said to him, aren't you afraid? And I think it was just part of, I mean, one of the great things about putting this book together, and it's tough because you're talking about people 100 years ago, but their personalities come through. And Talat's personality is very clear as a kind of a guy who, that's his thing, is to not be afraid. He had been asked these questions before, even when he was in Constantinople. And he said, life is too short. I have enough things to worry about. I'm not going to worry about. And the first thing he said, the question is, aren't you afraid of being assassinated? He says, who would assassinate me? Everybody likes me. And then Herbert says, the Armenians would assassinate you. And he said, I have too many things to worry about. Nazim, of course, who you mentioned, did elude Operation Nemesis. He was high on their list. And of course, Kemal hanged him in 1926 as part of what appeared to be a trumped-up assassination attempt. He took out Nazim and, how do you say his name, David? He was also hanged, right, in 1926? Yes. The finance. Yes. So these are, by 1926, everybody's gone who can be really any kind of problem for Kemal. Yeah, I mean, look, I got to be honest. I could spend the rest of my life on this thing. I mean, I definitely respect the historians' work, just the work of the research. This has been, I do have to go back to making a living. I have to go back to walking around with a coffee cup on Law and Orders and things and getting overpaid for that work, but it's amazing. I think the amazing thing for me, and you guys, I don't know what your experiences are with this kind of thing, of researching and so forth, but of course, because I went into every book that's on Turkey, every book on Armenia, everything that everybody's writing, you start to realize that 75% of these people are just writing down what they read in some other book, and it's like that game of telephone. They change it as they're writing it, and it keeps changing. I've seen Talarian biographies where they're just making things up. They don't know what happened, so they start to just say stuff. But this transformation is really corrosive to the whole enterprise of getting factual about history. I mean, it becomes very problematic when somebody like Bernard Lewis is seen as the font of all wisdom, and then people paraphrase him, and now you've got these kind of very diluted versions of what happened to the Armenians that actually just aren't true. And I know that these people, like I said, I know that people read this stuff and believe this stuff because I have intelligent, educated professors telling me this sort of alternate history stuff. And all you can say is that the Turkish effort has been somewhat successful. And of course, for those of you who don't know, and I'll just put it in a nutshell, this isn't just an issue about Turkish government saying this is what we believe happened, and the United States just says, oh, okay, oh yeah, what happened? Oh, we'll write that down and we'll repeat it every chance we get. It's because Turkey is such a powerful ally of the United States, and there's really, I don't think Hillary Clinton should take the opportunity to say things like it's a debate, because she didn't have to say that. But of course they are prohibited from using the word genocide regarding Armenian genocide, and it's very, 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 very sensitive because, I mean, it just gets worse every day. I mean, we're right now at another one of these major turning points about our relationship with Turkey, which Turkey plays to anybody who thinks that, I mean, one of the Armenian things, if you don't know this, Muge, is that Armenians believe the Turks are stupid and Armenians are smart. If you think that, you know, you're already at a disadvantage if you think that, because clearly it's been very smart. I want to say one other thing, and this is a kind of a, just because you brought up Turkish, what's happening in Turkey, this is something that has to be thought about if you're an Armenian and you're interested in genocide denial. You have to turn the story around for just a second and imagine that you are a Turkish, you're somebody who works in the government of Turkey. Let's just start from this crazy idea that people who work in the government of Turkey are not criminals. They're just people who work in a government. Let's just start with that. And then imagine that in the 1980s, there were these Armenians who went all around the world and killed and assassinated Turkish diplomats, which is what happened. And not just them, but their children, their friends. And this is people that you know. Just try to wrap your mind around that and imagine what your opinion would be of Armenians if you had had that experience, if your best friend had been killed somewhere by an Armenian in Asala or Justice Commandos. Not just think about that in terms of how would you feel if that happened, but then what would be the continued, what would you think about this denialist campaign? Maybe you would be more enthusiastic about it just for sheer spite. Just say, screw those Armenians. I'm never gonna. It's just something that should be thought about because it's part of the picture. And a lot of Armenians don't want to acknowledge that these organizations existed between 1975 and the 90s and did bad things, and it needs to be looked at.
I'm going to ask for 2 last questions, but please keep it brief. And I've already designated one.
Well, I have to keep it brief too, Catherine?
No, you don't.
Because I will
Just
never
question.
keep it brief.
I know you can't.
No.
Thank you for your time this evening and sharing your insight with us. I grew up in the Detroit parish community, born and raised in the Armenian church, 3rd generation. Like you, I heard the stories of my great-grandparents that were survivors who lived into their hundreds, and so their stories live inside of me. I currently serve as the Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries for the Armenian Diocese in New York, and I know that I'll be promoting your book with the young adults that I work with. And one question that comes to mind as I hear your story, and growing up in Watertown, which is a community I've spent many days and nights in, and knowing that you've served as an acolyte on the altar and different things like that, what drew you away from the church, and also what kept you connected to your heritage more so than your faith?
Well, I'm I'm about as I'm a real child of the 60s, and I think there was definitely, for all, this isn't something specific to Armenian Church, Armenian Apostolic Church, but all the churches, I mean, I can't think of any friends or acquaintances of mine at that time and when I was in college who, you know, on Sunday morning would be saying, I'm going to church. I mean, it just wasn't happening. There was of course, a renaissance of a more generalized sense of spirituality and belief in God. I believe in God. And that was something that, for many of us, replaces organized religion. I don't know what to make of organized religion. I don't know what to make of just organized anything on the part of human beings. They kind of, you know, religion is something created by people, and I don't have any qualms with the Armenian religion. It's one of the more easier to be around Christian religion, certainly apostolic. It's simple, clear, and it seems to be generally beneficial. Then again, researching this book, I didn't know as much as I know now about the politics of what the Armenian clerics, who they were in the Ottoman Empire, how that even works. And it's interesting. I still get, you know, sometimes I get kind of goosebumps when I'm sitting next to an archbishop at a dinner or something like that. I know the religion is something I just don't understand, but organized religion among Armenians is integrated with political structures as well. But to say that, well, wait a minute, that's true for all major religions. So what am I talking about? I don't claim to be an expert, so I just kind of am standoffish from it. I do think that it's fun to look at historically what did happen in 301 AD, as opposed to Terdat being changed from a boar into a human being again, which, if you want to believe that, that's fine. But the political time, what's happening with the Roman Empire, what's happening with Christianity, and the choice on the part of the Armenians for Terdat to say, we're going to be Christians, is, of course, sets our destiny from that point on, not just with the genocide, but the Crusades and all these other parts of our history, is fascinating stuff historically. And anybody interested in what it means to be Armenian can go back and look at that. That history is just amazing stuff. Just, you know, our church services and some of our sacraments and how they're a little bit different than the other early Christian churches. It's great stuff to look at, and I recommend it to look at that.
You spoke of the 40 Days of Musa and how there was efforts to make that into a film, didn't happen, and now you don't see it as a film. And I was wondering,
That's just me. That's just me, the films that I would go see.
You know, with your book, Operation Nemesis, I couldn't help but draw a number of parallels to the 2005 film Munich by Steven Spielberg. What do you think of the potential for this book to be a film?
Well, when I've had 3 things that I've written been made into movies. The third one's coming out in the fall. It's my first novel. Maul is coming out, sort of punk rock movie. But I have to say that when I sit down to write, when I wrote Talk Radio or when I wrote Suburbia or Maul, I just can't think about the movie part of it because it starts to act as a sort of a, you know, exerts very strong gravitational pull in terms of what I think I need to put out here. And an important part of this book was exposition. I mean, that's been the real challenge, is how to deliver to the reader a relatively easy to read synopsis of, this is some Armenian history, here's some Turkish history, you know, bear with me here because you need to know these things if you're going to get to the next part. As a story, part of what I'm going to be doing here is looking at that's part of what my being here on campus is to do, is to sit down and break it down. I would say that the first thing I look at when I'm putting a movie together or a screenplay or a play is to say, what is the theme and what is this about? And it can't, if I start with revenge, I'm lost because I'm almost like in a genre movie and I don't know anything about there are other people who know how to do that. So I have to find the part of this that I need to sort of get my hands on and then go back and look at the story and say, how can I build it out from there? There have been rumors that the Nemesis, first of all, there's a bunch of Nemesis projects. This isn't the only one. And there will be movies attempted and all sorts of things. But I guarantee that if you try to hit this story head on, it won't work as a movie. You just can't do it. It's one thing to talk about Steven Spielberg and Steve Zalian and what they can do, but it's very hard to write this kind of thing. So for me anyway, that would be the way I'd have to. What I did mention to my agents as the book with the first version of this book was 3 years ago, and I've been editing it for 3 years now. But when I first was delivering it into where I am now, CAA, I said, okay, so when does the coverage happen and when do we start talking about a movie deal? Not because I wanted to make a movie, I just wanted money. And they said, that's not the way it worked. You mean this has to be kind of a success on its own, and then there'll be interest. Somebody will come along and want to buy the book as a property to then build a movie out of. And just one last postscript to that, I guess the movie industry in Russia is pretty much Armenians, some really rich Armenian guys. And the word is like out, and I keep getting told that there's a guy who's got $100 million and he wants to meet with you and he wants to make a, and I could, anybody who's interested in the genocide and in terms of film should go online when you get home and look up The Cut, look at the trailer of The Cut, which is the movie, which is by a German-Turkish filmmaker. And in many ways, I think this is the movie that Armenians have wanted to see get made. I think it's ironic that a Turk had to make it, but it's a real, you could tell just by looking at the trailer, everybody in the audience could be crying at the end of it. It's intense. The Cut.
So absolutely one last question. This gentleman sweet talked me into it. So.
Thank you, Professor. Eric, I feel so proud of you. And my father was a survivor from genocide. And he was orphaned in Lebanon, so I was born in Lebanon. So I ended up moving here in 1971. I have two sons, Alex and Peter. Alex and Patrick Sarkisian, they create a website, theforgotten.org. Look in that, 7 different languages, German, Italian, Japanese.
English. Does it have English? That's what
it's in English, of course. Open that website, theforgotten.org, and there is a lot of good information. You feel like you're in a desert there, Zor. You taking the pictures, the way he designed it, my son, he's a computer animation, he does, and your body start generating, you become a new Armenian. You saw what happened, your generation. All those Armenians we lost, before they were dying, they said one word, don't forget us. Fight for it. Bring the justice to the world. There's so many Armenians, we're losing them. They're not involved with Armenian cultural programs, their identity. They're fading away just to make money and running away.
Well, I do want to respond just to that last thing, and thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I do think, and I have found that when I do presentations, and this is about the 6th one around the country, just as a run-up to this, the publication of this book, and I want to say when the book comes out, I look forward to getting on the radio and anywhere I can, not to push the book, but to talk about the Armenian genocide in a way where a lot of people can see it and hear about it. But I encounter many younger people who are really thirsting for information that is not as polemical or as a lot of what has been presented. They want to hear, they just want to know what is the story. Not that I have the corner on that, but it's a complex story. I think we have to be honest to ask the Turks to be honest, and then there can be there can be a true recognition of the Armenian genocide. Sometimes there are ways people can tell this story where Armenians are kind of innocent victims. There's certainly many, obviously countless. The majority of people were totally innocent people, but there were a few people who were there to fight. And to never mention those people is to not tell the story completely. I just think it's good to tell the story. And since you're bringing up websites, Catherine did not actually give you my website address for the monologues, and that is 100monologues.com. And go on and see your favorite actors from all your favorite TV shows doing my monologues, and come to see my thing. It's free. See how I can just switch from the most solemn thing possible to just Hollywood. That's what it takes.
Thank you, Eric. Please do finish your book. Historians tend to go on for years. There's never a moment of time to finish. We're looking forward for the adaptation.
Thank you
and
for
the play.
having me, Kat, and
thank you
for having me
coming.
here at the
Please
school.
continue to come to our events. We're looking forward to seeing you.